the lights across Blue Lake Camp had been dimmed for hours, leaving only the silver wash of moonlight to illuminate the rows of wooden cabins nestled among towering pines. At precisely 2:14 a.m. on June 17, 2001, 16-year-old Ellie Parker vanished from Cabin 8 without a sound, leaving behind nothing but her diary, locked with a small brass key and a cryptic note that read, "Some doors only open once. I have to see what's on the other side." By morning, her neatly made bed and the sneakers missing from beneath it would become the epicenter of a mystery that would haunt Pine Valley for nearly 2 decades. Before we dive into this mystery, please like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you think happened. Your opinion could be the key to understanding this story. Pine Valley had always been the kind of small town where everyone claimed to know everyone else's business. Nestled between mountains that seemed to cradle the community in a protective embrace, it was a place where summer meant the annual influx of eager campers to Blue Lake, the crown jewel of local tourism and the economic lifeblood of the region. The prestigious camp had been owned by the Morrison family for generations, its pristine waters and ancient forests drawing children from wealthy families across the country. The evening before Ellie disappeared had been ordinary in every way that mattered. Counselors reported that she participated enthusiastically in the evening campfire, her laughter mingling with the crackling of flames and the sweet scent of roasting marshmallows. Fellow campers recalled her singing along to acoustic guitar songs, her voice clear and confident. No one noticed anything unusual, except for her best friend, Mara Collins. She kept looking at the sky, Mara would later tell investigators, her voice barely audible, and she checked her watch at least a dozen times. When I asked her what was wrong, she just smiled and said, "Nothing's wrong. Everything's finally right." What Mara didn't mention in that initial interview, what she wouldn't reveal until 18 years later, was that she and Ellie had argued that night. The subject of their disagreement would become a piece of the puzzle that would haunt Mara long after others had given up searching. The camp awakened to chaos the next morning. The forest ranger, Thomas Morrison, organized search parties that combed every inch of the surrounding woods. Volunteers waded into the cold waters of Blue Lake. Police dogs followed trails that mysteriously ended at the water's edge. Parents arrived with frantic eyes and trembling hands, clutching photos of a smiling girl who seemed to have dissolved into the mountain air. But what if this was just the first piece of an even bigger puzzle? As days stretched into weeks, the official search yielded nothing. No footprints leading away from the camp. No disturbed earth suggesting foul play. No sightings in neighboring towns. It was as if Ellie Parker had simply stepped out of reality, taking all traces of herself along. When authorities finally closed the case under unexplained circumstances, they couldn't possibly know that 18 years later, a pair of preserved sneakers would be discovered in a sealed underground passage, sneakers identical to those Ellie wore the night the sky above Pine Valley erupted in an unexplainable northern lights display that had no business appearing at that latitude. And they certainly couldn't know that Mara Collins, now an award-winning investigative journalist, would return to face both the town's secrets and her own, determined to discover if her last words to her friend had somehow pushed Ellie to disappear into the darkness that summer night. The excavator's metal teeth bit into the damp earth behind Cabin 8 with a mechanical groan. March 2019, nearly 2 decades after Ellie's disappearance, and Blue Lake Camp was undergoing extensive renovations to modernize its aging facilities. The morning air carried the sharp scent of pine and freshly turned soil as construction worker Ray Mendez guided the machine through its methodical work. "I felt the ground give way," Mendez would later recall, his calloused fingers nervously twisting the brim of his hard hat. Like something hollow underneath just collapsed. When I got out to check, I saw an opening, a passage that shouldn't have been there. What he discovered would reopen wounds that Pine Valley had spent 18 years trying to heal. If you're already feeling chills down your spine, you're not alone. This discovery changed everything about what we thought we knew. The underground passage extended approximately 15 feet beneath the camp's surface, its walls reinforced with old timber that had somehow resisted decay. At its end lay a small chamber, sealed with what appeared to be a makeshift door fashioned from camp materials. And behind that door, preserved in the cool, dry air of the underground space, sat a pair of white Converse sneakers, size 7, with a small blue star drawn on the right toe. Ellie Parker's sneakers, immediately recognizable from the case file photographs. Sheriff Donovan Hayes, now nearing retirement, stood at the edge of the excavation site, his weathered face betraying no emotion as he stared into the darkness below. He had been a deputy when Ellie vanished, one of the first responders to arrive at the camp that morning. Now, the sight of those perfectly preserved sneakers reignited questions he had long ago resigned himself to never answering. "Call the state forensics team," he ordered, his voice carrying the weight of decades of unresolved grief. "And someone get in touch with her parents." News of the discovery spread through Pine Valley with the speed and force of a wildfire. At the Pine Valley Herald offices in the center of town, Editor-in-Chief Gregory Peters received a call that would alter the course of his newspaper and the town itself. "Greg," the voice on the other end said without preamble. "It's Mara Collins. I just heard about the sneakers." 3,000 miles away in her Manhattan apartment, Mara Collins stood rigid by the window, her free hand clutching a colorful notebook, one of dozens she had filled since leaving Pine Valley. Her meticulous notes about Ellie's case filled shelf after shelf, a testament to the guilt that had shaped her career as an investigative journalist. "I'm coming home," she said, watching her reflection in the glass as storm clouds gathered over the city. "I need to be there when they open that tunnel completely." What compels someone to return to the epicenter of their deepest trauma? Is it closure or something more primal? The need to face the monsters that have haunted their dreams. For Mara Collins, returning to Pine Valley meant confronting not only the mystery of what happened to her friend, but also the last conversation they had. Harsh words exchanged in the shadows behind Cabin 8, followed by Ellie's whispered response, "You don't understand what's happening. But someday I'll show you." Within 24 hours, Mara had packed her bags, requested an extended leave from the magazine where she worked, and boarded a flight to the place she had sworn never to return to, carrying nothing but her notebooks, her press credentials, and the weight of a promise made to herself on the day Ellie disappeared, to find the truth, no matter where it led. The late March air bit at Mara's cheeks as she stepped off the bus at Pine Valley's lone station. Little more than a covered bench and a faded schedule board. The mountains loomed on the horizon, familiar and forbidding, their peaks still capped with winter snow. At 48 degrees Fahrenheit, the town felt colder than Manhattan, though perhaps that was the chill of memory rather than actual temperature. "Mara Collins," came a gravelly voice from behind her. "Never thought I'd see you back in these parts." She turned to find Thomas Morrison, the former forest ranger, standing beside an aging pickup truck. Now in his 70s, his once commanding frame had shrunk with age, but his eyes remained sharp and wary beneath bushy white brows. His family had owned Blue Lake Camp for generations, and in 2001, he had been the one to organize the search for Ellie. "Mr. Morrison," she acknowledged with a nod. "I didn't expect a welcome committee." "This isn't a welcome," he replied bluntly. "It's a warning. Some things should stay buried, Mara, for everyone's sake." "But what makes a man so desperate to keep the past underground? Is it guilt, shame, or something far more complicated?" Before she could respond, Morrison climbed back into his truck and drove away, leaving her alone with her luggage and questions. The interaction confirmed what Mara had suspected. Her return was already known throughout town. News traveled fast in Pine Valley, just as it always had. At the Pinewood Inn, the only hotel in town, the clerk handed Mara a room key while deliberately avoiding eye contact. "Room 17, she said. "Second floor, end of the hall. Continental breakfast starts at 6. The room was exactly what Mara expected. Dated floral wallpaper, a sagging queen bed, and a view of the town's main street. She unpacked methodically, arranging her notebooks on the small desk in chronological order, from the original 2001 notes to her most recent observations about the tunnel discovery. Her cell phone rang, Sheriff Hayes requesting her presence at the station. "I'd like to get your statement about your last interaction with Ellie on record," he explained, his tone professional but guarded. "Now that we have new evidence." The sheriff's office smelled of coffee and paper, its walls lined with community notices and outdated wanted posters. Hayes himself had aged considerably since Mara had last seen him, his hair now completely gray, deep lines etched around his eyes and mouth. "You're aware we've secured the tunnel area as an active crime scene," he began, sliding a cup of coffee across his desk toward her. "Just see." "Crime scene?" Mara questioned, her journalistic instincts immediately alert. "Have you found evidence of foul play?" Hayes sighed, removing his glasses to rub the bridge of his nose. "No, but the state forensics team wants to treat it as such until we determine how those sneakers got there. They're analyzing soil samples from inside and testing the shoes for DNA." What he didn't say, what hung in the air between them, was that everyone knew those were Ellie's shoes. The real question was whether Ellie herself had placed them there, or if someone else had. "I need access to the tunnel," Mara stated, meeting his gaze steadily. "That's not happening, Collins. Not until we complete our investigation." As she left the station, Mara noticed a flyer on the community board announcing the annual Pine Valley Spring Festival, featuring traditional storytelling by local indigenous elders. The date, 2 days away. Perhaps not all paths to the truth ran through official channels. Back in her hotel room as darkness fell over the town, Mara opened her laptop and began writing, the glow of the screen illuminating her determined expression. Day 1. Pine Valley guards its secrets like a mother bear protecting her cubs. But every secret leaves traces, and I've returned to follow them, no matter where they lead. Dawn broke over Pine Valley, painting the mountains in shades of amber and gold. Mara had barely slept, her mind racing with questions about the underground passage and Morrison's warning. After a quick breakfast, she made her way to the home of Ellie's parents, a modest 2-story house at the edge of town that looked exactly as it had 18 years ago, down to the wind chimes hanging from the front porch. Patricia Parker opened the door before Mara could knock, as if she'd been waiting. The years had not been kind. Grief had carved permanent hollows beneath her eyes and silvered her once auburn hair. "I knew you'd come," she said simply, stepping aside to let Mara enter. The living room was a shrine to absence. Ellie's photographs adorned every surface. Her academic awards still displayed proudly on the mantel, the piano in the corner draped with a sheet, untouched since she disappeared. "They found her shoes," Patricia said, her voice flat with the practiced tone of someone who had learned to discuss tragedy without breaking down. "But not my daughter. Have you ever noticed how absence can feel heavier than presence? How someone who isn't there anymore can fill a room more completely than when they were alive?" "Mrs. Parker," Mara began carefully, "I need to ask about Ellie's diary, the one they found on her bed that morning." Patricia's expression hardened slightly. "The police returned it to us after they finished. It was locked and we never opened it. Some privacies should be respected even in death." She paused, correcting herself. "Even in disappearance. May I see it?" Mara asked. "I think it might help us understand what happened." After a moment's hesitation, Patricia rose and disappeared upstairs, returning with a small leather-bound book secured with a tarnished brass lock. She placed it in Mara's hands without a word. The diary's weight felt significant beyond its physical dimensions. Inside might be the answers Mara had sought for 18 years, or simply more questions. But one critical element was missing. "The key?" Mara inquired gently. "She always wore it on a chain around her neck," Patricia replied. "Wherever she went, that's where the key is too." Returning to her hotel room, Mara examined the diary under the bright desk lamp. The lock, though old, remained sturdy. She considered her options. Breaking it would damage potential evidence, but waiting for a locksmith or permission from authorities could take days they didn't have. Her journalist kit provided the solution. A set of slim picks she had used countless times to access restricted areas during investigations. 15 minutes of careful manipulation, and the lock surrendered with a soft click. Mara held her breath as she opened the cover, half expecting the pages to be blank. Instead, she found Ellie's neat handwriting filling entry after entry, but not in any language Mara recognized. The text appeared to be encoded, letters and symbols arranged in patterns that made no immediate sense. Between the written entries were detailed drawings, intricate maps of what appeared to be underground tunnels, marked with symbols and calculations. And repeated throughout was a curious symbol, a vertical line crossed by 3 horizontal dashes, always accompanied by a reference to E. The final entry, dated June 16, 2001, the day before the disappearance, contained only a simple drawing of the night sky, with unusual wavy lines emanating from above, and below it the words, "The door opens tonight. 2:14 a.m., magnetic field conditions optimal." Mara's phone rang, startling her. Sheriff Hayes' number flashed on the screen. "Collins," he said without preamble. "The lab results came back on those sneakers. There's something you need to see." The forensics report lay open on Sheriff Hayes' desk, its clinical language documenting what the state lab had found on Ellie's preserved sneakers. Mara scanned the document, her trained eye picking out key phrases. Soil composition inconsistent with local samples, unusual mineral traces, and most significantly, strong magnetic residue of unknown origin. "What does it mean?" she asked, looking up at Hayes, who stood by the window, arms crossed defensively across his chest. "It means those shoes were somewhere else before they ended up in that tunnel," he replied. "Somewhere with soil and magnetic properties unlike anywhere in Pine Valley. But if not Pine Valley, then where? And how did they find their way back?" Hayes continued, his voice dropping slightly. "There's more. We found partial fingerprints on the inside of the sneakers, Ellie's as expected, but also trace DNA evidence that doesn't match her profile." "Have you run it through the database?" "No matches," Hayes admitted. "But here's what's strange. The lab says the DNA sample shows unusual degradation patterns, unlike anything they've seen before, almost as if it was exposed to unusual environmental conditions." Mara thought of the diary entry, "magnetic field conditions optimal," and felt a chill that had nothing to do with the office temperature. "I need to see the tunnel," she pressed again. Hayes sighed. "Fine, tomorrow morning. Supervised visit only." Outside the sheriff's office, Pine Valley's main street was alive with preparations for the spring festival. Workers hung colorful banners between lampposts, and a temporary stage was being erected in the town square. Mara paused, watching an elderly woman directing the placement of traditional wooden carvings around the stage area. The woman turned, as if sensing Mara's gaze, and smiled, a knowing expression that crinkled the web of lines around her eyes. She beckoned Mara over with a gnarled hand adorned with turquoise rings. "You seek answers about the girl who walked between worlds," she said without introduction. "I am Rosa Whitehawk. My people have stories you should hear." Mara followed Rosa to a small cafe, where the elder ordered tea for them both, speaking in low tones about the history of the land before Pine Valley existed. "This place has always been special," Rosa explained, her weathered hands cradling her teacup for warmth. "The lake, the mountains, the caves beneath. They form what my ancestors called a thin place, where the boundaries between worlds grow permeable under certain conditions." "What conditions?" Mara asked, thinking again of the diary's reference to magnetic fields. "When the sky dances with lights that don't belong, when the stones beneath sing with energy," Rosa replied cryptically. "It has happened 5 times in my lifetime, always as something strange follows." Mara leaned forward. 5 times? Were there other disappearances? Rosa nodded slowly. Not all were documented as your friend's was. Some were dismissed as runaways, others as accidents in the wilderness. But the pattern remains for those with eyes to see. As they parted, Rosa pressed something into Mara's palm, a small stone carved with the same symbol Mara had seen throughout Ellie's diary. The vertical line crossed by 3 horizontal dashes. The doorway mark, Rosa explained. Carry it when you enter the underground. It offers protection to travelers. That evening, Mara spread her research across the hotel bed. She created a timeline on her laptop, marking known disappearances in the region and cross-referencing them with astronomical events. Using online scientific archives, she pulled records of magnetic anomalies and aurora activity at unusually low latitudes. A pattern emerged. Each disappearance had occurred during rare geomagnetic events, including one that had been recorded the night before the construction crews uncovered the tunnel. Her phone pinged with a text message from an unknown number. Not all who disappeared wanted to be found. Meet me at the old science building. Midnight. Outside her window, the first colored lights of the festival illuminated the town square as the sun set behind the mountains. Among the gathering crowd, Mara spotted Thomas Morrison watching her hotel window with an unreadable expression. The old Pine Valley High School science building stood separated from the main campus, a relic of 1960s architecture with its sharp angles and excessive concrete. At midnight, the structure loomed against the star-filled sky, its windows dark except for one faint light on the second floor. Mara approached cautiously, her journalist's instincts on high alert, recorder in one pocket, pepper spray in the other. The front door was unlocked. Someone was expecting her. If you've ever walked through an abandoned school at night, you know that peculiar silence, the absence of the voices that should fill such spaces, making every footstep echo like an intrusion. Following the light, Mara climbed stairs that creaked beneath her weight. The classroom door stood slightly ajar, revealing a space largely unchanged since 2001. Dusty lab tables, outdated periodic table posters, and in the center, a man meticulously arranging papers on the teacher's desk. James Ellison, he introduced himself, extending a hand. I taught physics here when Ellie was a student. Ellison appeared to be in his 60s now, his tweed jacket frayed at the elbows, his demeanor that of someone accustomed to explaining complex concepts to bewildered audiences. According to the case files, he had left town abruptly after Ellie's disappearance, citing a family emergency that never quite materialized in the background checks. You knew about her experiments, Mara stated rather than asked, watching his reaction carefully. A sad smile crossed his face. Ellie Parker was the most brilliant student I've ever encountered, he replied. She understood quantum mechanics better than most doctoral candidates, and she became obsessed with multiverse theory. He gestured to the papers on the desk, copies of Ellie's research notes, equations far beyond Mara's comprehension, and diagrams of magnetic field generators. She believed Pine Valley sat at a convergence point of unusual geomagnetic properties, Ellison continued, his voice taking on the rhythm of a lecture. A place where, under specific conditions, the barriers between parallel realities might become permeable. You're saying she thought she could travel between dimensions, Mara clarified, struggling to keep her tone neutral, journalistic. Not just thought, Ellison corrected, his eyes bright with something between fear and wonder. She proved it was theoretically possible, and then she built a device to amplify the natural magnetic anomalies that occur here during certain celestial events. He placed a photograph on the desk, Ellie standing proudly beside what appeared to be a homemade apparatus of coiled wire, capacitors, and other components Mara couldn't identify. Where is this device now? She asked. That's what I've spent 18 years trying to determine, Ellison replied. It wasn't in her room, not in the woods where they searched. I believe she took it with her, wherever she went. But the most crucial revelation came as Ellison described helping Ellie access sealed geological survey records from the 1940s. which documented a network of natural caves beneath Blue Lake Camp, caves that aligned perfectly with the tunnel diagrams in Ellie's diary. The Morrisons knew about these caves, he explained. They're the reason the family built the camp there in the first place. Thomas Morrison's grandfather was obsessed with local legends about travelers who disappeared during magnetic storms. As dawn approached, Ellison shared his final piece of information, weather satellite data from June 17, 2001, showing an unexplainable aurora borealis event centered precisely over Pine Valley, one that had lasted exactly 7 minutes and 14 seconds, beginning at 2:14 a.m. I don't know if she succeeded in crossing over or if something went wrong, Ellison concluded, his voice heavy with 18 years of doubt. But I do know that Thomas Morrison sealed those tunnels after her disappearance. The question is, why? Mara left with more questions than answers, but also with a newfound direction for her investigation. As she walked back to her hotel in the pre-dawn light, she noticed posters appearing around town. The Pine Valley Council had called an emergency meeting about the tunnel discovery. The battle lines of the town's response were already being drawn. The Pine Valley Community Center hummed with tension as residents filed in for the emergency council meeting. Decades-old social divisions became instantly visible in the seating arrangements. Longtime families clustered together on the left, newer residents and business owners on the right, with an uneasy buffer zone between them. At the front, Mayor Richard Harper, Thomas Morrison's nephew and current owner of Blue Lake Camp, called for order, his practiced politician's smile failing to mask the concern in his eyes. As you all know, recent construction at Blue Lake Camp uncovered an underground structure, he began, carefully avoiding the word tunnel. While this has generated considerable speculation, I want to assure everyone that there is no evidence connecting this discovery to the unfortunate disappearance of Eleanor Parker in 2001. The deliberate choice of words, unfortunate disappearance, rather than tragedy, did not go unnoticed by Mara, who sat in the back row, notebook open on her lap. Such linguistic distancing was often a technique used to minimize emotional response. But have you noticed how truth has its own gravity? How it pulls at inconsistencies until they can no longer hold together? From the middle of the audience, Patricia Parker rose slowly to her feet. "Those were my daughter's shoes," she stated, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly silent room. "Preserved perfectly after 18 years in a tunnel no one told us existed. A tunnel on your property, Richard." Mayor Harper cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Mrs. Parker, I understand your distress, but this tunnel appears to be part of an old storage system from when the camp was first built. There's nothing sinister. Then why was it sealed?" The question came from James Ellison, who stood near the door, arms crossed defensively across his chest. The mayor's practiced composure slipped momentarily. "Professor Ellison, I wasn't aware you had returned to Pine Valley." "Answer the question, Richard," demanded an elderly man in the front row, Harold Jenkins, who had been sheriff during the original investigation. "If it was just storage, why seal it up without documenting it?" The meeting quickly devolved into factions, those arguing for full transparency about the tunnel and the renewed investigation, versus those insisting that reopening old wounds would damage the town's tourism-dependent economy. Throughout the heated exchange, Mara observed Thomas Morrison sitting silently in the corner, his weathered face impassive as accusations flew. When the meeting ended without resolution, people lingered in tense conversational clusters. Mara approached Mayor Harper as he gathered his papers. "Mr. Mayor," she began, recorders running in her pocket, "can you explain why geological surveys of the camp property were removed from public records after Ellie's disappearance?" Harper's smile tightened. "Miss Collins, I understand you're here as a journalist, but dredging up conspiracy theories won't bring closure to anyone. The tunnel is being thoroughly investigated by proper authorities. And the unusual magnetic readings in the area, the aurora event the night she disappeared, the pattern of previous disappearances during similar phenomena." Mara pressed, watching his reaction carefully. The mayor's eyes darted briefly to where his uncle stood watching them. "I think we're done here," he said firmly. "If you'll excuse me." Outside the community center, Mara found an unexpected ally waiting beside her rental car, Lisa Brennan, who had been a junior counselor at Blue Lake in 2001. "They're hiding something," Lisa said without preamble. "I was on night patrol the evening Ellie disappeared. I saw Thomas Morrison entering the woods behind Cabin 8 at approximately 1:30 a.m. When I asked him about it the next day, he denied being anywhere near the campers' area that night." Mara's journalistic instincts surged. "Would you be willing to go on record with that statement?" Lisa nodded, though fear flickered across her face. "There's more. 3 days after Ellie vanished, I found Morrison and Richard in the woods with equipment, like they were looking for something specific, separate from the main search parties. As the town split into warring camps of those demanding answers and those preferring silence, Mara realized that Ellie's disappearance had merely exposed fractures that had always existed in Pine Valley, between preservation of secrets and pursuit of truth, between those who feared what lay beneath the surface and those determined to bring it to light. That night, returning to her hotel, Mara found her room door slightly ajar. Inside, nothing appeared disturbed, but on her neatly made bed lay a key, small, brass, and antique in design. Beneath it, a note in unfamiliar handwriting. "Some answers aren't in the diary but above it. Check her ceiling." The Parker household felt heavier than before, grief hanging in the air like an invisible fog as Patricia led Mara up the narrow staircase to Ellie's bedroom, preserved exactly as it had been on the morning she disappeared. Sunlight filtered through faded blue curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the still air. "No one's moved anything," Patricia explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "Her father couldn't bear it, and after he passed 5 years ago, I couldn't either." The room was a teenage time capsule from 2001, boy band posters, a shelf of science trophies, a collection of astronomy books, and a twin bed with a handmade quilt. Mara's gaze drifted upward to the ceiling, recalling the cryptic note. "Check her ceiling." "Mrs. Parker, may I stand on the chair to look at something?" Mara asked gently. Patricia nodded, watching with curious detachment as Mara positioned a desk chair beneath the center of the ceiling and carefully climbed up. From this vantage point, the seemingly plain white ceiling revealed its secret. Barely visible to the naked eye were tiny markings, mathematical symbols, and coordinates drawn in what appeared to be UV reactive ink. "She always had that blacklight poster," Patricia commented, pointing to a faded fluorescent image of the solar system beside Ellie's bed. Mara borrowed the blacklight that had once illuminated the poster and directed it at the ceiling. Instantly, a complex diagram blazed to life above them. A map of stars and planetary alignments, with dates marked at intervals spanning decades. One date was circled multiple times, June 17, 2001. And another nearly 18 years later, just 3 days from the present. When patterns repeat across time, are they coincidence, or are they trying to tell us something we've forgotten how to hear? "There's something else," Mara said, carefully examining the space above Ellie's closet. "It looks like—" She gently pressed against a section of the ceiling tile, which gave way to reveal a small hidden compartment. From it, she extracted a plastic-wrapped object, a VHS tape labeled simply, Experiment 12 Success. Patricia's hands trembled as she led Mara to the basement where an old television and VCR sat covered in plastic. "My husband couldn't part with our old things," she explained, unwrapping the dusty equipment. The tape showed Ellie, 16 and intensely focused, standing in what appeared to be one of the high school science labs. She spoke directly to the camera, her voice steady and scientific. "Experiment 12, June 10, 2001. After 11 failed attempts, I finally calibrated the electromagnetic amplifier to respond to the specific frequency patterns observed in Pine Valley during geomagnetic events." The footage continued. showing Ellie demonstrating a device constructed from what looked like modified ham radio parts, copper coiling, and components scavenged from other electronics. As she activated it, compass needles in the background spun wildly, and a small object, a pencil, momentarily seemed to flicker, becoming temporarily translucent before re-solidifying. Partial success. Ellie's recorded voice exclaimed, her face alight with triumph. Object integrity maintained during 5-second phase shift. Notes: amplifier requires 42% more power for human biomass. Calculations indicate next viable window. June 17, 2:14 a.m. Magnetic storm forecast confirms optimal conditions. The final segment showed Ellie making adjustments to a backpack-sized version of her device. If calculations are correct, the passage beneath Blue Lake will serve as a natural amplifier. The limestone content and mineral deposits create the perfect conduit for the electromagnetic field manipulation required for full phase transfer. The video ended with Ellie looking directly into the camera, her expression solemn yet excited. If you're watching this after June 17th, know that I went willingly. This isn't an escape, it's an expedition. Mara, if it's you finding this, I'm sorry for not telling you. I couldn't risk being stopped. Patricia Parker sat motionless, tears streaming silently down her face. She knew my daughter was planning this. All these years I thought someone had taken her from us. I didn't know, Mara insisted, her own voice choked with emotion. We argued that night because she was acting strangely, and I thought... She paused, the weight of 18 years of guilt suddenly unbearable. I accused her of meeting a boy in secret. She got angry, told me I didn't understand what was really happening. Those were the last words we exchanged. As they sat in the basement's dimness, surrounded by the ghosts of what might have been, Patricia reached for Mara's hand. Show me everything you found, she said. If my daughter chose to go somewhere, I need to know where and why. With the VHS tape secured in her bag, Mara left the Parker house with renewed purpose and a growing certainty that the tunnel awaiting her inspection the next morning was far more than a forgotten storage space. It was, perhaps, the doorway through which Ellie had deliberately stepped, leaving her sneakers behind as proof of her passage. Morning arrived with a fine mist hanging over Pine Valley, shrouding the mountains and lending an ethereal quality to the landscape. Mara met Sheriff Hayes at the Blue Lake camp entrance, where yellow police tape cordoned off the construction area behind Cabin 8. The excavator stood abandoned, its metal arm frozen in mid-dig like a mechanical beast caught in the act of unearthing secrets. 30 minutes, Hayes reminded her gruffly, and don't touch anything. They descended into the exposed tunnel via a temporary metal ladder. The air grew noticeably cooler as they climbed down, carrying the earthy scent of soil and something else, a metallic tang that seemed to coat the back of Mara's throat. The sheriff's flashlight illuminated rough timber supports and walls of packed earth that eventually gave way to natural limestone as the passage extended beneath the camp. This section was clearly man-made, Hayes observed, his voice echoing slightly in the confined space. But up ahead, it connects to something older. The tunnel widened into a small chamber where the floor dropped away to reveal stone steps carved directly into the rock, descending deeper into darkness. Along the walls, Mara noticed carvings, ancient symbols that matched some of those in Ellie's diary, including the now familiar doorway mark Rosa Whitehawk had identified. Have you ever felt like you're being watched by something that exists just beyond the edges of what you can perceive? That prickling awareness that reality might be thinner than we imagine. The forensics team found the sneakers here, Hayes indicated, pointing to a small alcove cut into the chamber wall. Perfectly preserved as if they'd been placed there yesterday, not 18 years ago. Mara examined the alcove carefully, noting how it appeared deliberately shaped rather than natural. Her fingers traced the stone around it, feeling subtle irregularities, more symbols, these nearly worn away by time. There should be another passage, she murmured, recalling Ellie's diary maps. Leading toward the lake, Hayes frowned. That's not on any of our scans. This chamber and the entrance tunnel are all we've found. Mara's hand stilled on the wall as her fingers detected a different texture, smoother, almost polished. Pushing gently, she felt the stone give way slightly, rotating like a pivot. A grinding sound echoed through the chamber as a previously invisible seam in the rock wall widened, revealing a narrow passage beyond. Jesus, Hayes breathed, instinctively reaching for his sidearm. That wasn't here during our initial search. The newly revealed passage stretched away into darkness, its floor showing no signs of dust or debris, as if recently swept clean. Along its walls, luminescent minerals caught their flashlight beams, reflecting blue-green light in mesmerizing patterns. This matches the tunnel systems in Ellie's diary, Mara explained, her heart racing. These passages lead to a chamber beneath Blue Lake. Before Hayes could respond, his radio crackled with static, the dispatcher's voice breaking through in fragmented bursts. Sheriff! Magnetic readings. Equipment malfunction. Immediate evacuation recommended. Hayes frowned, tapping his radio. Repeat that dispatch. You're breaking up. Only static answered him. He checked his phone, no signal. His flashlight flickered, then dimmed momentarily before regaining strength. Something's interfering with the electronics, he muttered. We should head back up. Mara's own phone displayed an unusual message. Time synchronization error. System time, 2:14 a.m., June 17th, 2001. Sheriff, she said quietly, showing him the screen. I think we found what Ellie was looking for. Hayes stared at the phone, his expression hardening. Out! Now! This is officially beyond a local jurisdiction. As they climbed back toward the surface, Mara noticed Hayes checking his watch repeatedly, his face growing increasingly concerned. What is it? She asked once they reached the open air. My watch stopped at 2:14, he admitted reluctantly. And look at the sky. Above them, in broad daylight, faint ribbons of green and purple light shimmered across the otherwise clear blue expanse. An aurora in daylight, an impossibility made visible. It's happening again, Mara whispered, understanding dawning. Whatever conditions existed when Ellie disappeared, they're returning. Hayes immediately called for additional security around the tunnel entrance, but Mara's mind was already racing ahead. According to Ellie's ceiling calendar, the peak of this phenomenon would occur in just 2 days, matching exactly with the Pine Valley Spring Festival. As she walked back to her rental car, Mara felt her phone vibrate with an incoming text. Unknown number. Not all doorways stay open. If you want answers, come to the old fire tower at sunset. Bring what she left behind. The abandoned fire lookout tower stood on the highest ridge overlooking Pine Valley, accessible only by a narrow hiking trail that wound through dense pine forest. As Mara climbed the steep path, the setting sun painted the western sky in brilliant oranges and reds. In her backpack, Ellie's diary, the VHS tape, and the small stone Rosa Whitehawk had given her. The wooden structure creaked in the evening breeze, its once red paint faded to a dull rust. At the top of the weather-worn stairs, silhouetted against the sunset, stood the unmistakable figure of Thomas Morrison. You came alone, he observed as she reached the platform, slightly out of breath from the climb. Smarter than I expected. You know something about what happened to Ellie, Mara stated, keeping her distance. Something you've hidden for 18 years. Morrison turned to face the valley below, his weathered hands gripping the railing. From this vantage point, Pine Valley lay spread out in miniature. The town center, the winding road to Blue Lake Camp, and beyond that, the mountains rising like sentinels. My family has been the caretakers of this land for 4 generations, he began, his voice carrying the weight of long-kept secrets. Not just of the camp, but of what lies beneath it. He gestured toward a metal lockbox tucked in the corner of the platform. Everything I know is in there, but before I give it to you, I need to know, What do you intend to do with the truth? There are moments when silence says more than words ever could. Those breath-held seconds when the future hangs in balance. I want to know if Ellie is alive, Mara answered simply. And if she is, where she went. Morrison studied her face for a long moment before nodding slightly. My grandfather was the first to document the phenomena, the lights, the magnetic anomalies, the effects on electronics. He was also the first to connect them to the disappearances. He unlocked the box and removed an ancient leather journal, its pages yellowed with age. 1887, 1922, 1956, 1979, and then 2001. 5 events, 5 disappearances, all following the same pattern, all leaving behind some small token, a shoe, a hat, a watch, perfectly preserved in the tunnels. The journal contained detailed observations of magnetic field fluctuations, astronomical alignments, and hand-drawn maps of the cave system, far more extensive than anything in the police records. After Ellie disappeared, I found her device in the chamber, Morrison continued, avoiding Mara's gaze. A contraption of wires and electronics, still humming with energy. I recognized it immediately, something designed to amplify what was already happening naturally. You took it, Mara realized. And then you sealed the tunnel. Morrison nodded. To protect others. Whatever doorway she opened, I feared it might work both ways. Things might come through as well as go out. Things? Mara repeated, a chill running down her spine despite the warm evening. The night after she vanished, I saw something in the woods near the tunnel entrance, Morrison admitted, his voice dropping to barely above a whisper. A figure that looked like Ellie, but wrong somehow. It moved differently, spoke in a voice that wasn't quite human. It asked for directions to her house. He paused, visibly shaken by the memory. I lied, gave it wrong directions, and it flickered like a television with poor reception before disappearing into the trees. The next morning, I sealed the tunnel and destroyed all records of the cave system from public archives. From his jacket pocket, Morrison produced a small device that looked like a handheld Geiger counter. Magnetic field detector. It's been going crazy for the past 3 days. Readings higher than I've ever recorded, even in 2001. The aurora today, Mara said. It's starting again, isn't it? Morrison nodded grimly. Whatever's happening peaks in 2 days, during the spring festival. Precisely when your friend's calculations predicted. Before leaving, Morrison handed her a final item, a small brass key hanging from a tarnished chain. Found this in the chamber with her device, he explained. I believe it opens her diary. The symbols inside, they're not just a code, they're instructions. As darkness fell over Pine Valley, Mara used the key to unlock the final secrets of Ellie's diary. With the code finally broken, the entries revealed themselves to be a meticulous log of experiments, observations, and finally, a plan. The last page contained a message that made Mara's blood run cold. If I succeed, others will follow. If I fail, the doorway remains. Either way, on the next alignment, someone must go to close the passage, or what's on the other side will find its way through. Dawn found Mara parked outside a modest bungalow on the outskirts of Pine Valley, the former residence of James Ellison, Ellie's science teacher. According to town records, the property had remained vacant since his abrupt departure 18 years ago. The mortgage payments continuing from an anonymous bank account. The front door key, provided reluctantly by Sheriff Hayes after Mara shared Morrison's revelations, turned smoothly in the lock. Inside, the house appeared frozen in time, a half-empty coffee mug on the kitchen counter, mail still piled on the entry table, all covered in a thick layer of dust. The silence of abandoned spaces has its own particular quality, a stillness that feels both empty and expectant, as if the walls themselves are holding their breath. Mara moved methodically through the rooms, documenting everything with her camera. The living room contained bookshelves filled with advanced physics texts, many focused on quantum mechanics and theoretical models of parallel dimensions. Sticky notes protruded from dozens of volumes, connecting disparate concepts across multiple books. But it was the basement that held Ellison's true work. Behind a locked door, which yielded to one of Mara's picks, she discovered what could only be described as a laboratory. Workbenches lined with sophisticated equipment, walls covered in equations, and at the center, a clear space where something substantial had once stood, leaving only mounting brackets in the concrete floor. He was building something here, Mara murmured to herself, examining the power cables that ran to the empty space. Something that required significant electrical input. Along one wall stood filing cabinets filled with Ellison's research, decades of data on magnetic anomalies across North America, with Pine Valley prominently highlighted as a priority investigation zone. His notes documented unusual phenomena dating back to indigenous accounts from centuries before European settlement. A leather-bound journal, similar in design to Ellie's diary, contained Ellison's personal observations of his student. EP demonstrates extraordinary intuitive understanding of quantum field theory beyond any high school student I've encountered. Her questions about dimensional barriers suggest she's independently reaching conclusions that parallel my own research. Ethical concerns about encouraging her investigations weighed against the possibility of breakthrough. Decision: provide guidance within safety parameters. Later entries showed Ellison's growing alarm. EP has constructed a working prototype of a field amplifier based partially on my designs, but with modifications I hadn't considered. Her theory about using natural geological formations as conductors shows promise in initial tests, increasingly concerned about stability issues if full-scale attempt is made. The final entry, dated June 16, 2001. EP refuses to delay the experiment despite my warnings about field containment. She believes the celestial alignment tonight creates optimal conditions that won't recur for 18 years. She's taken the portable unit to the tunnel system beneath the camp. I've prepared monitoring equipment to track the event from a safe distance. If she succeeds, science changes forever. If not, I fear the consequences of an uncontrolled trans-dimensional event. On a workbench near the back of the basement, Mara found sophisticated monitoring equipment still connected to power and still running, its displays showing real-time measurements of magnetic field fluctuations. The readings were spiking dramatically, confirming Morrison's observations. Most significantly, Mara discovered a sealed case containing what appeared to be a partially constructed device similar to the one Ellie had shown in her video, a field amplifier designed to enhance natural electromagnetic phenomena. A notebook beside it contained what looked like instructions for stabilizing a transition event, and most critically, for closing what Ellison termed a dimensional aperture. He knew, Mara realized. He knew she might create something that couldn't be closed, and he prepared a way to seal it. As she photographed the notes, her phone suddenly emitted a high-pitched tone, its screen displaying rapidly changing symbols before going completely dark. Throughout the basement, electronic equipment began to malfunction. Lights flickering, displays scrambling, a persistent hum building in the air itself. Through the small basement window, Mara saw the impossible, the morning sky darkening as if night were falling in reverse, while ribbons of multicolored light danced across the unnatural darkness. Her watch stopped at 2:14. For 7 minutes and 14 seconds, Pine Valley experienced what would later be described as a localized temporal anomaly. Electronics failed, compass needles spun in circles, and multiple residents reported seeing duplicates of familiar landmarks, as if the town existed in two places simultaneously. When it ended, Mara's phone restarted with a single notification, a text message from an unknown number. "The door is opening wider than before. Tomorrow night at the festival, it will fully unlock. What comes through depends on who controls the key. Bring Ellison's stabilizer to the tunnel." Pine Valley's Spring Festival transformed the town square into a kaleidoscope of colored lights, food stalls, and music. Children ran with glow sticks, tracing neon paths through the twilight, while elders gathered around Rosa Whitehawk's storytelling circle. where she recounted ancient tales of sky bridges and travelers between worlds. The festivities created the perfect cover for Mara to meet Patricia Parker behind the community center. Away from curious eyes. "I brought what you asked for," Patricia said, handing over a small box containing items from Ellie's room, her compass, a handmade bracelet of copper wire, and a small notebook with additional calculations. "Thank you," Mara replied, gently touching the older woman's arm. "Are you sure you don't want to come with me to the tunnel?" Patricia shook her head, a sad smile crossing her face. "My husband always said faith requires accepting that some questions don't have answers we can understand. I've spent 18 years demanding answers. Now, I'm afraid of what they might be." In the shadow of celebration, how many truths remain unspoken? How many mysteries persist not because they can't be solved, but because we fear what solving them might mean? Across the festival, Sheriff Hayes coordinated with state police who had arrived that afternoon, not for the festival, but to secure the tunnel entrance following Mara's revelations about Ellison's research. Hayes himself appeared torn between his duty to maintain order and his growing belief in Mara's theories. "The magnetic readings are off the charts," he told her during a brief meeting near the police barricade. "State scientists are baffled. Whatever's happening, it's accelerating." Thomas Morrison and his nephew, Mayor Harper, stood in heated discussion near the festival's main stage, their argument visible in their gestures, though their words were lost in the festive noise. When they noticed Mara watching, they abruptly separated, the mayor returning to his official duties, while Morrison headed towards the path to Blue Lake Camp. As sunset faded into true evening, Mara made her way to the camp, Ellison's stabilizer device carefully packed in her backpack, alongside Ellie's diary and the artifacts from Morrison's lockbox. The police checkpoint was surprisingly easy to navigate. Hayes had left instructions to allow her access, though she was to wait for him before entering the tunnel. The construction site stood eerily quiet, the yellow police tape fluttering in a breeze that carried both the distant sounds of the festival and something else, a low, rhythmic humming emanating from the exposed tunnel entrance. Mara checked her equipment one final time: flashlight, camera, the stabilizer, and the stone Rosa had given her. Her phone displayed the same error message from before: time synchronization error. System time 2:14 a.m., June 17, 2001. "You came." The voice behind her made Mara spin around, nearly dropping her flashlight. James Ellison stepped from the shadows, looking exactly as he had in his classroom days earlier, but now carrying a device that mirrored the one in Mara's backpack. "You knew this would happen," Mara accused. "You've been preparing for 18 years. Ellison nodded, his expression grave. "What Ellie did, what I helped her do, was open a doorway that never fully closed. Every 18 years, the alignment makes it possible to cross through again. But each time, the barrier between dimensions weakens." Together they descended into the tunnel, the humming growing louder as they approached the chamber where the sneakers had been found. The air seemed to vibrate with potential energy, making speech difficult and electronic equipment unreliable. The hidden passage Morrison had revealed now stood fully open, a soft blue light pulsing from deep within. As they navigated the narrow corridor, the walls themselves appeared to shimmer, as if not quite solid. The tunnel opened into a vast, natural cavern beneath Blue Lake, its ceiling dotted with luminescent minerals that cast an ethereal glow across underground pools. At the center stood a natural stone arch, its surface carved with the same symbols found in Ellie's diary. Beneath the arch, the air itself seemed distorted, rippling like heat waves above hot pavement, but with occasional flashes of landscapes that weren't the cave, glimpses of forests, strange structures, and skies filled with impossible colors. "The dimensional aperture," Ellison breathed, his voice filled with both scientific awe and fear. "It's far more unstable than before." As they approached the arch, the rippling intensified. Within the distortion, a figure began to take shape, humanoid but flickering between solid and translucent, its features resolving slowly into a familiar face. Ellie Parker stood before them, yet not the 16-year-old who had disappeared, but a woman in her mid-30s, her eyes carrying the weight of experiences beyond imagination. Behind her, other figures moved in the rippling air, watching but not approaching. "Mara!" Ellie's voice echoed strangely as if reaching them from a great distance. "You found my messages." "Ellie," Mara whispered, tears forming in her eyes. "You're alive." "In a manner of speaking," Ellie replied, her image flickering. "I succeeded in crossing over, but the physics were more complicated than I calculated. Where I went, time moves differently. I've been trying to communicate back for what felt like a few months to me. 18 years for you." Ellison stepped forward, activating his stabilizer. "The aperture is dangerously unstable, Ellie. What you set in motion is threatening both realities." Ellie nodded, her expression solemn. "I know. That's why I've been trying to reach you. Others here have crossed before, from other times, other places where similar doorways opened. They've helped me understand what needs to be done." From behind Ellie, another figure partially emerged into view. Similar to a human, but with subtle differences in proportion and movement that registered as deeply unsettling. "Your world and ours were never meant to connect directly," the figure stated, its voice carrying harmonics impossible for human vocal cords to produce. "The barriers must be restored before permanent. Damage occurs to both realities." Mara watched as Ellison and Ellie, teacher and student, separated by 18. Years and countless dimensional barriers worked together to configure their respective stabilizers. The humming intensified, and the cave walls themselves began to vibrate in resonance. "Will you come back?" Mara asked Ellie during a pause in their work. "Now that we know you're alive?" Ellie's expression softened with something between regret and peace. "I can't. The transition is one way for biological organisms. But I needed you to know I chose this. I needed my parents to know I'm alive, just elsewhere." As the archway's distortion grew more pronounced, Ellie pressed something into Mara's hand, an object unlike anything she had ever seen, with geometric patterns that seemed to shift when not directly observed. "Proof," Ellie explained, "something that could only exist in the reality where I now live, so they'll know you're telling the truth." The cavern suddenly plunged into darkness as every electronic device failed simultaneously. When emergency lights activated seconds later, the archway stood empty, the rippling distortion gone, the humming silenced. Only the strange object in Mara's hand proved that the encounter had been real. Above them, at the festival in Pine Valley, witnesses would later describe seeing the night sky momentarily fold in upon itself, stars rearranging into impossible patterns before snapping back to normal. For 7 minutes and 14 seconds, Pine Valley existed in two places at once, and then, decisively, in only one again. The morning after the spring festival dawned clear and ordinary, with no visible evidence of the extraordinary events that had transpired beneath Blue Lake. State scientists documented a return to normal magnetic readings throughout the region, while the tunnel system showed no further signs of anomalous activity. In Sheriff Hayes' office, Mara placed the object Ellie had given her on his desk, a crystalline structure that seemed to reflect light from angles that didn't exist, its surface patterns reorganizing when viewed from different perspectives. "Materials analysis confirms it's not composed of any elements found on the periodic table," Hayes explained, reading from the preliminary report. "Its molecular structure defies known physical laws." Beside it lay the brass key to Ellie's diary, Ellison's research notes, and Thomas Morrison's family records, a collection of evidence supporting what would become known as the Parker phenomenon. "What happens now?" Mara asked, her journalist's instinct for the story competing with her personal connection to Ellie. Hayes sighed, removing his reading glasses. "Officially, the case remains classified as an unexplained disappearance. The federal scientists have contained the tunnel area for environmental hazard assessment, which gives them time to study it thoroughly while keeping the public at a safe distance." Beyond official responses, How do we integrate the impossible into our understanding of reality when the unexplainable happens? Do we reshape our world to include it, or do we reshape the event to fit our world? That afternoon, Mara sat with Patricia and David Parker in their living room, the impossible object resting on the coffee table between them. She had told them everything: Ellie's experiments, her deliberate crossing, and her message from beyond the dimensional barrier. "She wanted you to know she's alive," Mara concluded, watching tears stream down Patricia's face, "that she made a choice and she's at peace with it." David Parker, Ellie's younger brother, who had been only 10 when she disappeared, studied the object with the same scientific curiosity that had defined his sister. Now 28 and a physicist himself, he understood better than most the implications of what had occurred. "She completed the journey our ancestors called walking between worlds," he said softly, referencing the indigenous legends Rosa Whitehawk had shared. Science and myth converging at last. For the community of Pine Valley, the events forced a reckoning with decades of secrets. Mayor Harper resigned his position after admitting to helping cover up evidence of previous disappearances to protect tourism. The Morrison family relinquished control of Blue Lake Camp, which was subsequently repurposed as a scientific research center dedicated to studying the unique geological and magnetic properties of the region. James Ellison, vindicated after 18 years of exile, accepted a position heading the new research facility, his life's work finally acknowledged by the scientific community. Thomas Morrison, too old now for recrimination, found a measure of peace in finally sharing the burden of knowledge his family had carried for generations. Under Rosa Whitehawk's guidance, he helped establish a memorial that honored all those who had walked between worlds during the periodic alignments, not as victims of tragedy, but as explorers of the unknown. The mysterious object became the centerpiece of this memorial, a tangible reminder that reality extended beyond the boundaries of common understanding. For Mara Collins, the investigation that had begun with guilt and uncertainty culminated in an award-winning documentary series titled Doorways: The Science of Interdimensional Travel. Her meticulous documentation of Ellie's work, combined with Ellison's research and the physical evidence, forced the scientific community to confront possibilities previously relegated to science fiction. But in quiet moments, alone in her apartment in New York, Mara often found herself holding the small stone Rosa had given her, the doorway mark, and wondering about the 18-year cycle, about future alignments, and about choices still to be made. On her desk lay a single sheet of paper, calculations based on Ellie's work, projecting the next alignment. And beside it, her own diary, filled with notes about magnetic field amplifiers and dimensional barriers, the beginnings of a path that might someday lead her to follow in her friend's footsteps. Some doorways, once discovered, can never truly be closed again, even when they're no longer visible to the eye. 5 years after the events at Blue Lake Camp, Mara Collins stood at the edge of Pine Valley Lake, watching the sunset paint the water in shades of amber and gold. The research center that had replaced the camp hummed with activity behind her, scientists continuing their study of the unique properties that made this location special. A memorial stone now marked the entrance to the tunnel system, which remained carefully monitored but had shown no unusual activity since that night at the festival. Inscribed on its surface were the names of all known travelers, those who had disappeared during alignments dating back to the 19th century. Ellie Parker's name was there, but unlike the others, hers was followed by a simple phrase: not lost, but elsewhere. If this story left you as impacted as it did me, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment your opinion below. Each comment is like a new piece that can help unravel other mysteries like this one. The scientific papers published by the Research Center had transformed understanding of quantum physics and dimensional theory, with Ellie's work posthumously recognized as groundbreaking. The impossible object she had passed to Mara had been studied by laboratories around the world, its properties defying explanation, even by the most advanced analysis. For the Parker family, the knowledge that Ellie had chosen her path that she lived on in some form, somewhere beyond ordinary perception, had transformed their grief into a complex peace. Patricia had become an advocate for families of missing persons, helping them navigate the uncertain terrain between loss and hope. Thomas Morrison had passed away the previous winter, leaving behind comprehensive records of his family's multi-generational observation of the phenomena. These records, combined with Rosa Whitehawk's oral histories, created a timeline of events stretching back centuries, a pattern of doorways opening and closing in perfect 18-year intervals. As twilight deepened around her, Mara removed a small device from her pocket, her own version of Ellie's field detector, refined through years of collaboration with Ellison and the research team. Its display showed minimal activity tonight, the baseline readings that had become familiar through constant monitoring. "Thinking about her?" David Parker asked, approaching along the lakeshore. Now the lead physicist at the research center, he had continued his sister's work with equal brilliance and greater caution. Mara nodded, tucking the device away. "The calculations show the next major alignment is still 13 years away. But I can't help wondering if there are smaller opportunities we're missing. Moments when the barrier thins, even briefly." David smiled, the expression so reminiscent of Ellie that it made Mara's heart ache. "We've improved the detection equipment based on your suggestions. If there's even a momentary fluctuation, we'll know." They walked together toward the research center, where lights glowed warmly against the gathering darkness. Inside, a team of scientists conducted experiments attempting to reproduce aspects of Ellie's original work under controlled conditions, never opening a full doorway, but testing the theoretical boundaries of cross-dimensional communication. In Mara's office, a wall displayed her collection of evidence, photographs of Ellie's diary pages, Morrison's family records, newspaper clippings about historical disappearances, and at the center, a detailed map of the sky on the night Ellie vanished. But it was the bottom drawer of her desk that held her most private work, a journal documenting her own experiences since that night in the cave, the strange dreams of landscapes unlike any on Earth, the moments when her field detector registered impossible readings only when in her presence, the growing certainty that something of the other side had transferred to her during those 7 minutes and 14 seconds of contact. "Some doorways exist within us," Rosa Whitehawk had told her shortly before passing away the previous year. "Carried in blood and bone and memory, you touch the threshold, child. You'll never be entirely of one world again." That night, as Mara slept in her cabin near the research center, her dreams took her once more to the stone archway beneath the lake. But this time, something changed. The rippling air solidified momentarily, and Ellie stepped through, now middle-aged but unmistakable. "The barriers are thinning faster than we calculated," Dream Ellie said urgently. "The alignment is accelerating. It won't be 18 years, Mara. It's coming sooner." Mara woke with a start, her field detector screaming from the bedside table. For exactly 7 minutes and 14 seconds, it registered readings identical to those recorded during the event 5 years earlier, before falling silent. On the screen of her phone, a text message from an unknown number. "Prepare. The next door opens in 7 days. Will you cross through?" Outside her window, the night sky briefly shimmered with impossible lights, an aurora dancing where no aurora should be, visible for just one moment before fading back to ordinary stars. Beneath her pillow, the doorway-marked stone vibrated with a gentle warmth, as if awakening after a long sleep. Some journeys begin with a single step, others with a decision to leave everything behind and step into the unknown. Not because you're running from something, but because you're running toward a truth greater than the world you've always known. For Mara Collins, that decision awaited. 7 days to choose between the familiar constraints of one reality and the unlimited possibilities of another. 7 days to determine if she too would leave behind only a small token, proof of her passage between worlds. The choice that Ellie had made now beckoned to her. The doorway was opening once more, and somewhere, in a reality adjacent to our own but fundamentally altered, Ellie Parker was waiting to welcome her friend home.